Welcome home, where we provide information, inspiration, and motivator after motivator after motivator here on America's Next. I have Tariq K. Shabazz here with me today. How you doing, Tariq?
I'm doing just fine. How about yourself?
I'm doing great, man. I'm doing absolutely swell. I'm very excited for a conversation with you today to discover your journey and the work that you're doing. I think it's tremendous work. And so I want to say hello to you and hello to everybody who's coming into the building. Yolanda Riley says, hey, she's already in the building. We have other
How
people
you
who we
doing?
can't see. They're watching us. Yeah. They're watching us on Roku TV, Apple TV, Android TV, Facebook, and YouTube. So wherever you might be, I want to say welcome. Thanks for being a part of our community. Our new show time is 9 p.m. Let's rock and roll. Oh, I got to get me some papers. You know, when you're having a serious conversation and the authority figure or whomever, they stop to straighten their papers up. Tonight's going to be one of those nights. Tariq, talk to us about where you're from.
Okay. Let me not put my pen down. All right. So I was born and raised in Cleveland, Ohio. I talk about this a lot. Let me be as organic as possible so it doesn't sound like I'm reading a speech. Um, I know what the inner cities look like because I grew up in the inner cities, and we've seen so much devastation since I was a kid. I can personally speak to it as a personal testament. Um, when I was younger, I remember being a child and my next door neighbor being murdered in my backyard, and I didn't know how to
Hold on,
necessarily. Yeah, yeah.
hold on. I was going to ask you to explain what you meant when you said that you lived in a terrible environment. You immediately got into the details. You said
I'm
that,
saying.
that you said somebody got killed right next door to you.
No, my next door neighbor was killed in my backyard.
Your next door neighbor was killed in your backyard. How old were you when this happened?
Mm, I don't think I was older than 10. I don't believe I was older than 10 at that point. Um,
Okay.
I was fairly young. I was fairly young. But one of the things I do remember specifically about it was when I went into he was killed in my backyard. I remember like days after I looked into the backyard and I still saw where part of his blood was on the fence. And I don't know how I really felt about it. I didn't talk much about that until I got into adulthood. Um, So it was very impactful in terms of the way that I recognized and understood and came to terms with things. Very much specifically, I wanted to address was those weren't the only things that I saw. So those things over time became internalized. So
Mm,
I'm a young black man who's coming up living in the inner city. So we know what it like I said, anybody who's lived in the inner cities, they know these are things that are common. And it's sad to say it, but it's common. And I normalized it. That was the only way that I could get through it. Like, as a kid going into my adolescent stage, as well as going into becoming an adult. I can't tell you how many times that I've heard and seen gunshots. I can't tell you how many times I had to run while people were shooting right near me or shooting in the general vicinity. And
okay.
there's not much you really can do about that.
Let me
Um,
ask you something.
I'm sorry.
What neighborhood specifically did you grow up in, and what was your relationship like with your parents and your immediate family?
Okay. So I grew up on Miles Avenue, but the street specifically was Elmarge Avenue. So for anybody who doesn't know what the street is like, it looks like a little C. That's what the street looks like. But again, oh, you asked about specifically about my family.
Your
I
relationship your
mhm.
relationship with your parents. What was it like?
I actually had a fairly good relationship with my parents. I mean, I lived with my mother, my father. When I was a kid growing up, my father, he had instances where he was in and out of the jail system. That 100%. So that was one of those things that really affects you too as a young black man. Where you see that your dad is being incarcerated, and then again, I'm seeing all these other things coupled, like I said, with the gun violence is going on in the streets. I didn't necessarily always have my father around to really talk to and sit down with.
Mm,
Um, so it did play a role in how I grew and how I got to my maturation. I feel like a lot of
absolutely.
times, a lot of a big portion of it is that I feel like I matured outside by myself a lot of times in the streets.
Mm,
And I wasn't an
wow.
individual who did things that were illegal. I just found other ways to navigate away from doing some of those things that I knew so many of my friends were starting to partake in. Because the reality is this: at a certain age, you 12, 13 years old, you're already starting to see a lot of young people are starting to embark on in terms of in that journey.
Mhm.
And I didn't want to go that route, but there's times where I felt like that could have been a possibility. I really felt that way sometimes, but it
Okay.
took a lot out of me not to.
So let's get this straight. You grew up in the Miles community of
Hmm.
Cleveland, Ohio, which is on the east side of Ohio. And for those people who don't know, Miles, the community of Miles used to be um, a, a well-to-do, almost like prosperous area where there was a lot of culture in the Miles area. There were the drive-in movie theaters. There was, access to Randall Park Mall. There was a lot of things happening. There was a lot of entrepreneurship. There was a lot of industry in the Miles community. And as the decades passed, an area like Miles saw a lot of those businesses leave to go to other areas or out of the country possibly. And so when you came into the picture, that Miles neighborhood was now on its last leg. It was almost going
Hmm.
into dilapidation, and people were getting killed in people's backyards. That is the context that you grew up in, and you also found yourself raising yourself
Well,
in
so
that community.
let me not
Mhm.
say specifically because I don't want to say that. I just but yes, out
Mhm.
when you're out in my mother, she worked a lot. My mother worked. She
Oh
worked.
yeah, you know what?
Well,
You know what? You know
yeah.
what? You know what? You know what? You're absolutely right. You didn't raise yourself. Respect to all of the parents, all of the store owners, the adults who saw Tariq or who saw Cedric or other young people up and down the street back and forth to school. Respect to all the adults. But explain what you mean when you say you found yourself figuring out life for yourself. Go ahead.
Okay, I can definitely touch on that. It's because the fact of the matter is that when you're a child growing up in conditions where people tend to be in their survival mode, because that's what the reality is, people are in a survival mode. What tends to happen is who that individual, for instance, for myself, I had to understand ways to how I could go forward. Like I'll give you a perfect example. I would go to the school. I caught multiple buses to school, and before I got into the actual institution, I was already thinking about. I pray that that bus doesn't come late later on, because if it does, I'm gonna have to worry about what's gonna happen if I'm late. And the worry, this was actual real legitimate fears. It wasn't a phobia. It was because people would be robbed in certain areas. I mean, how many times have you've been a kid, you go into a certain area, neighborhood, where someone asks you, where do you live or where are you from? And it doesn't go that's not going to be a positive interaction dialogue between the two when that kind of question is asked. So
So there were territories. There were
yeah,
territories where you could be walking down the street and people want to know, where are you from? Are you from this street? Is this the neighborhood that you claim? And
100%.
if it's not, then let's fight you. Let's jump you. Let's beat you up. Correct.
Or rob you. These are
Correct.
many. These are many occasions that definitely could. These are many situations that could definitely happen. Um,
Mhm.
I've been on waiting on bus before uh, to go home, and an individual pulled out a firearm on me, and I just
Mhm.
ran. I just ran. So like I've had all of these instances happen. The thing about it, the biggest problem that I wanted to address with so many people is it wasn't the fact that these things were necessarily happening, because those are extremely traumatic events. The problem that really happened was that I normalized it. That I thought that I was able to move forward and just it became normal. So, for instance, like I said, when people started shooting, or shooting around you in certain areas and things of that nature, I didn't think of necessarily running if I didn't feel I was, it was from a certain distance. I wouldn't flinch sometimes because it was something I heard every day. I mean, we heard gunshots every day. People still hearing that right now. If you live in Cleveland, the Clevelanders understand exactly what I'm talking about. And that's not just happening in Cleveland. It's happening all throughout the American inner cities.
Talk to me about the tragedy, the tragedy of normalizing trauma. Why is that such a problem?
There's a couple ways. I mean, again, in terms of the ability for an individual who's very young, the youth, for them to attempt to understand what's really going on. I mean, they're highly impressionable. I mean, at that age, I'm
That's
extremely
right.
young. I don't know who I am really in relation to anything. I don't know what my niche is in the world. Only thing I know is that I'm here, and that's concrete. That's what I do know. But the conditions that I saw was extremely devastating. And like I said, this is something that didn't in there. I'll go deeper into something specifically. When I was 16 years old, my cousin and I, we had went to a corner store, and we were on 135th and Kinsman. This is where we were at, 135th and Kinsman. We went to the store over here, and we went to get the things that we needed. And we had a bicycle. He was on the back with the pegs, and I'm not sure if anybody ever did it, but the person stands on the back and they stand on they hold on to you.
Mm-hmm.
We wobbled slightly, and a young man on the bike, who was about the same age as me, he rode past us, and he called me out of my name and told me to move out of the way. And at that point in time, I was a lot more aggressive. I didn't appreciate what he said, and I wasn't gonna stand for him saying that. And that's how I felt and perceived at the time. And he stopped, and we were about to have a physical altercation, and he backed away from me, and he pulled his gun out and put it in my face, just like that. And he put it in my face. So I'm looking down the barrel. I'm 16 years old, and one of the things I've never really talked about enough is your life. Really, with the flashing in your life is a very real thing. Like, I felt everything in my entire life stop for a moment, and I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for my uncle. He came. I always call it a sign from God. I can't really explain it. He said he randomly had thought to go to the store, and we had just left probably not more than 10 minutes ago. He said, I randomly just thought about going to the store, and he came there. He played for my life, so the man didn't shoot me and his son, or my cousin, and I 100% believe he was going to do it. I looked in his eyes, and I felt nothing but rage. I felt his rage.
You know what? That's a great segue into this expansion right here. You looked in his face and you saw the rage.
Mm-hmm.
The rage, which was normal. The rage of this potentially being the same person shooting a firearm yesterday who now has a firearm in your face. See, when we normalize trauma, it's a big problem, because young people they go through a collection phase where they're collecting everything that they're going to give back to you someday. And while they're in that collection phase, in a place like Cleveland, where the industry has left, where the generation before might have potentially chose hard drugs or alcohol, as opposed to joining the community watch and being productive members of the community, you have a lot of hurt young people who are growing up, like you said earlier, feeling like they're figuring out things on their own. They resort to guns, they resort to gangs because they want protection, right? And in this society where we're normalizing the trauma as opposed to normalizing the community watch, normalizing the leadership of Black men, normalizing the leadership of Black women, and endorsing that, we have a lot of people just running free, pulling guns on each other, committing crimes on each other, like it's nobody's business, and everybody's parents is at work.
A lot of people. So one of the things, like I said, I noticed that, like, obviously, because I was a life experience for myself, was that a lot of people really just need love, and they don't see the value in the community. I touch base on this all the time. Like, for instance, if you see your conditions are continuously plagued with economic instability, lack of prioritization from our elected officials, you name it, all these conditions, those things coupled together, they absolutely devastate your entire area. And I don't necessarily even have an issue with young people coming together, banding together, and try to, build with each other. That's not the issue. It's the fact that it's the lack of direction, and the lack of direction coupled with that rage and of all these things that you don't necessarily even understand. If you don't see the value of yourself, it's hard for you to see the value in another human being. If you don't feel your value, it's extremely difficult for you to mirror, to be objective and see that you see value in someone else. That's extremely difficult.
That's right. That's right. What are your thoughts about the direction of our communities today, what direction have you seen it go since you were a teenager on the streets of Cleveland? What direction have our communities gone into from your perspective?
Well, I'm gonna be honest. I believe that we're spiraling worse.
There you go.
It's not getting better.
Mhm.
Um, we have to really put our hands on people and really move people, talk to these young kids. But not only, like I said, it's not even just going to be talking to these young kids. We got to make sure we still are improving the actual conditions of the adults as well, because
Mhm.
those are like we talk in terms about a debilitating neighborhood. Those things they go down. Generational trauma, all of these things get passed down more and more and more and more. And we have so many young children who truly don't feel valued and they don't see the value. So when that happens, it's a fundamental breakdown. It's cyclical. And we know we have a prison pipeline that's just going to send these young people straight into those prison cells, as
Mhm.
opposed to putting out the most preventative policies that's going to improve their lives greatly.
That's right. All the different things that you're talking about right now are symptoms of
Mm-hmm.
normalizing. These are all symptoms of normalizing the chaos, normalizing the disorder and the pain to the point where we've got thousands of young people in the foster care system right there in Cleveland. We've got thousands of young people looking for direction. We've got adults looking for direction. And if nobody stops and says, hey, we need to have a town hall forum, we need to have a citywide conversation about what's going on in our city, and then we need to do a 180 in some respects. We need to do some new things and we need to turn around some realities. If no one does that, nothing gets better. And I think that's why you're doing some of the work that you're doing today, because you realize, hey, if no one else is going to step in and address the economic instability that's resulting in young hurt children riding around on the back of a bicycle with a gun in their pocket, then I'm going to do it. Tariq Shabazz. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I want you to talk about some of the positive influences in your life. Who spoke leadership and life into you? Talk about them.
Well, there's so many individuals to act that play an integral role in making sure I moved in a certain direction. And one of the things I want to address even still too is that my father is, even though he was absent in some form of fashion, he was still showing me certain things that I needed to understand. He was still giving me that insight and that understanding of these are things that I should be doing to move forward. And then also I also can learn from some of the mistakes and some of the decisions he did make. So those are
Mhm.
those things that build with me. So I always say that there is nothing you can't learn from anybody.
That's right.
You are never too intelligent to learn anything from anybody, because all these things play an integral role in your growth and your maturation process. So my mother played an integral role. Um, I military. I have so many people who I met throughout the military who were mentors. While I was mentors to individuals, I had my own mentors.
That's right.
So this is something like that. I mean, it's so many names, there's so many people. I mean, I can't. I don't want to just limit it to a few people, but definitely got to address the fact of my parents, because even like I said, my parents still played an integral role in me understanding myself. And even though I had to learn some things out there, they played an integral role in terms of that growth and maturation.
Absolutely. Can you talk to me about one thing that your father taught you, and then one
Oh
thing
yeah,
that your mother taught you? Yeah.
yeah. Okay, so one thing I say my father definitely taught me was when I was young. Most people don't know some things about me was when I was young, my father would wake me up when I would stay over. He'd wake me up at like 4 or 5 in the morning, and he'd get me
Mhm.
up and say, "Hey, it's time to do some research."
Wow.
So I would get up and have to do research sometimes with him, and he had make me write a paper. I want you to give me the 5WH. I want you to tell me everything about this, what's going on, and I remember as a kid, I would say all the time, I don't want to do this because I mean I can learn in school. He says, "Is that the only way you learn?" So
Wow.
that broke that put a little more discipline in me in that sense. And then my mother taught me truly how to embrace the fact of who I am, that it's okay to be you, and and also recognize, you know, that the emotional aspect side of myself, because far too often a lot of young men are being taught to mask how they feel at all times, and then they don't necessarily learn how to deal or cope with the issues that they are currently facing. So and it's so many things that my mother, she played a large role in. I was a math lead as a kid. I mean, I
Okay.
won a spelling bee as a young child.
Right.
Like I remember, I won a spelling bee in school. I placed in a regional contest. I mean, I worked on a lot of things as a kid. There's some things I never necessarily talked about.
Mhm.
Even in the whole campaign process, I never talked much about.
Right. I think it's very outstanding that your father used to wake you up at 4 or 5 in the morning
Hmm.
to have you do research. I think that is just outstanding. You never know what a young man or a young woman knows. You never know the
Hmm.
conversation that their parents are having with them. And I think it's great that you pass that along for a father out there as an idea. Hey, wake your child up and do some additional research. Teach them the
Hmm.
things that you want them to learn. Make a way to teach your children things that you want them to know. Now, with
Hmm.
that said, can you talk to me about what your school experience was like? What was high school like for you?
Okay, for high school. All right. So, I went to a school called Horizon Science Academy. It was a college preparatory school.
Mhm.
So it was a school of science. Um, my high school years, I mean, just like a lot of young children, you're trying to understand who you are. You know, you're facing those alienation phases. You're trying to learn really like, who are you? And I say all the time, I'm Tariq, but who is Tariq? So, you know, I wasn't the tallest guy. I was kind of small in stature and whatnot. But I went and played multiple sports. I played baseball, basketball. I wrestled. I played multiple sports throughout my time, and that's where I actually improved on my understanding of the entire political process. I was in speech and debate, um, and we would compete all throughout the state, and that was a really good. That was a really good time for myself, because politics was some of those things that fueled me. Because as a kid, as I stated, I saw so many of these issues that were absolutely horrendous and devastating my life, and then I would question, am I the only person that's dealing with this? And
Mhm.
for instance, when I was 16, when I faced the potential gun violence, legitimate, I mean, it was still gun violence, but I remember sitting down and just going over that going over that information, because I was in high school at the time. And
Mhm.
the craziest part about that was I didn't go to counseling after that happened. I went to school.
Wow. You
I
went
went to
straight to
school.
school. You were in
We went to
school. You
school
were
after
in
that.
school. Yeah,
Yeah, we were
you
about to
were in
go into
school thinking,
summer.
yeah. You were in school thinking about that gun pointed at your face,
Yeah,
as opposed
100%.
to, yeah, as opposed to reading, writing science.
How
Tariq
can
Shabazz
I
was in
couldn't
class.
focus.
That's right.
Hmm.
That's right. Is that the moment where you realized there's a million things I can do with my life? I'm going to dedicate myself to making my community a better place.
I think where I actually truly gathered that viewpoint, I was much younger, but I didn't feel like I had a voice. I felt voiceless. Um, I really felt like, what can I do? I'm just this young kid who lives in a corner, lives in the street where I've seen police officers, beating people in front of me, like right in front of me. I mean, I always question myself about that, like, what can I actually do? So I took it upon myself to. I wanted to further my understanding, get the most comprehensive understanding of, like I said, the political process. Obviously, right now, I may not have the most experience that some other individuals may possess, but I do have the life experience coupled, like I said, with the education. And then I went into the military. So those things really assisted in my like understanding these things much better.
Mhm. What experience really helped you to develop your voice?
I think it was a combination of things. It was the constant, revelation that I see that people felt like they didn't matter too. And when I recognized that, that's something that really like motivated me. most people who know me from growing up in the inner cities, in the streets, they always say like, "Oh, I always tell myself, I'm gonna run for some offices one day. I'm gonna be this. I'm gonna do this because we need it. We need it now. We need this now." And some people probably thought I was just, blowing hot air, but no, I was always serious about it. I was extremely dedicated to this, so much so that I had already knew what degree I wanted to go, and I said, I'm gonna go in political science. I know what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna become a political scientist.
Mhm. Mhm. What is a political scientist?
Well, a political scientist. All right, that's a rather long definition, but political scientist itself. I have a master's in public policy, so that will naturally recognize as what a political scientist is. But it's an individual who has the ability to understand and analyze the systems that's in place in terms of governance, and having that understanding of these things, these systems in place, and learning and adapting to see exactly how we can build and move towards the next step. It's just having that comprehensive understanding of the current systems that's in place, whether it's down from the federal, down to the state, county, municipal levels. So, but in a nutshell, yes, that's what it be. It's an individual who has that comprehensive understanding of the entire governmental process, the systems that's currently in place, as well as I even learned things outside of the country. I learned things because my bachelor's was in political science and concentration in international relations. So I learned things outside of this country. I learned about what is, geopolitics. I learned all these other things about how these countries work. What is an international liberalism as opposed to constructivism or realism? I learned all of those things early on.
A lot of people are living in cities clear across America, USA, and they feel voiceless. They're trying to figure out what's going on in the world around them. It doesn't match up to their emotional space, and they're trying to figure out how to become positive adults, how to get to the next chapter of their lives. Can you provide some encouragement to young adults and young people out there today who feel voiceless? What would you say to them?
Well, first thing I would say is to the people who feel voiceless, number one, that you have value. I want you to understand that very much so. You actually have value. Don't let these conditions that we know are systemic to control and erode your mind. You have unbelievable value and unbelievable potential. These are the things that I worked when I was still in the Navy. We would do some events where we would go out and talk to some students in middle schools regarding like bullying and whatnot, and that was always a really big topic. Go down there and go talk to children, and really just go get there and just get them to understand how much that they actually, what they really bring to the table. And another thing is, it's nothing wrong with organized together if we're building. Oh, thank you so much. When you're building and you're trying to understand, understand each other, but we have to move these young people away from where they don't have any guidance. We have to be the guidance for those children. We have to be the guidance. We have to be that.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're talking to Tariq Shabazz. He is a man on a mission to make his community a better place, and he's speaking with his actions. I want you to sit tight because after this brief message, we'll get more into his work. Thank you. America's Next Motivator, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 5 p.m. Eastern, Tuesday and Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern. America's Next Motivator, hosted by me, Cedric Riley, and sponsored by the Pride Empowerment Network. And we're back. Tariq, how you feeling out there?
Feeling all right? Can you hear
All
me?
right. Yeah. Right back into the thick of things. Before we went to break, you mentioned geopolitics. Can you talk to me about the power of Cleveland being situated right there on the Great Lakes? Why is Cleveland and why is Ohio a significant location when you look at the United States? Why
Okay.
does Ohio matter? Why does it matter?
See, you know what? That's a very good question in terms of when you asked about in terms of geopolitics. Well, the location itself of the state of Ohio, the northeastern Ohio, we have one of the greatest resources we could ever have. And for anybody who doesn't know, that's our lake. So we have a freshwater lake. Those are something that we can do so much with. We can build upon it. I'm seeing some of these this type of information being brought up in some of the Cleveland mayoral races. You hear more of these individuals. They're talking about how to actually harness our lake and actually utilize it to our benefits. So that is extremely important. So that's something that definitely needs to be addressed much further. Um, for me to give you a little more in-depth conversation about that, I will have to. I will reach back out to you specifically, exactly of how we can utilize it. But from the federal legislator standpoint, that's more so going to be based upon the state of Ohio and the leaders within the state.
Indeed. Cleveland, Ohio is one of the greatest locations in the nation. Let's be honest there. Okay, now what are your thoughts about economic growth in Cleveland? What do you see happening and what do you think could be happening in an ideal world?
Well, in terms of community economic development, I don't believe that we are investing into the people. I think as opposed to investing into the land when we for investors to come out, outside investors to come in and redevelop those areas, or as they call it, revitalization. But that revitalization doesn't actually necessarily hit the people, and what's the problem. We can't just have measures that we refer to that is going to incentivize and create jobs, but we're not vastly improving the lives of our constituents. That is an absolute failure from a public policy standpoint. I don't understand how anyone who's within the field in this field could ever imagine that is sensible. It's not a sensible component to implementing public policy. We have to address the issues that are plaguing your constituents. So economic community development has to be developing the community for the people who actually reside there, as opposed to just investing into the land and moving them out. That does not make sense.
That's right. So for those people who are just tuning in, we're talking to Tariq Shabazz. This man not only went to a very competitive high school, but he went to the Navy. He completed a master's degree, and now he's running for Congress in Ohio. Is that correct?
That is correct, 100%.
What title specifically are you running for?
I'm running for the United States House of Representatives for the 11th Congressional District of Ohio. So for anybody who's not familiar of how the process works, the U.S. Congress is comprised of it's called a bicameral legislature, which is the United States Senate as the upper house, and you have the House of Representatives, which is oftentimes referred to as the People's House, because it is a reflection of the population size of the people, versus the Senate being comprised of 2 senators per state. So it's important. This is some of those things where people talk about why it's so important to fill out the census. Those all deals with that. Specifically in terms of how many legislators will you have to the U.S. Congress. That's so important that people understand, which is done only every 10 years.
Okay. This is a very key moment right here. Ladies and gentlemen, let's put some hearts and likes in the building for Mr. Tariq Shabazz, because he's stepping up to the plate and he's getting involved in politics to mobilize policy to make our communities a better place. He's doing something that many of us, we admire. Some of us, we wish we could. We might not have the education or the talent, but nonetheless, you are getting in the exact seat of leadership in our communities. And so I definitely believe that we should wrap around your cause. We should understand your mission, and that we should definitely hear you out in terms of your perspectives, and see if we can provide a vote for you. Let's talk about the value of voting for those people who might be skeptical about the process. They might not believe in it, or people who do believe in it. Let's talk about voting for a second.
Well, rule number one, I want to address about the importance of voting. Voting is, some perceive that voting is single-handedly one of the most consequential things that you could ever have, in terms of being able to dictate the control of your own government, because the people who are elected, they lead at the will of the people. So we have to vote. But the thing is so important that I feel it's not touched on enough is, gonna be honest, we got to do this now. For anybody who's watching this, have you ever went to the ballot box and did not know who you were going to vote for? And it's okay if you had that happen, because this is something that we need to address so we get better at it. Because there is no sense to us just saying to vote if we're not politically engaging and being active enough to understand who or what we're voting for. We have individuals who are a part of prison pipelines who have continuously get voted in. And the reason being is because people, they don't know who they're voting for. They're just, they'll vote a name. They see a comment, all right, I'm going to vote for that name. And I can't say how every state does it, but specifically in the state of Ohio, you don't have to vote for every name that you see. To people who don't understand it, you don't have to vote for every name. Even if that person is the only name in an uncontested race, you do not have to vote for that person. You do not have to. You can leave that blank. And that's what I'm saying. It's so important that we understand that. We have to do more than just vote. We have to be an informed citizenry. So we understand why and who and what issues we're voting for or against.
That's right. How can people get in the know about candidates who are running for different offices? Where can people go to learn about candidates and to discover who's running for these different seats?
Okay. So I'll do the most official way that an individual can figure it out. So go to your local board of elections, and you can access everything. Right now is really important in moving into the digital age, that e-government is something that's really happening right now.
Right.
So having access, going into those websites, for instance, go to your local board of elections, and you'll look and see candidates, and you'll see all the candidates in the race. And another thing that you can do is fill out, put in that information of where you reside. In most of the county, your county board of elections will typically have something along the lines of that. But if you don't have it on your county board of elections, go to your Secretary of State's office website, and then you can actually put in your information of where you reside, and you'll be able to find exactly who is, which area you're represented by. Are you, which district rep, what state rep are you represented by? What state senator are you represented by? Things of that nature. That way you understand exactly who and what you're going to be voting on. And we have to do our due diligence too. That's another thing. We got to try to reach out to some of these people, because some of these individuals do not perceive that they don't have any fear of being voted out, because they look at other individuals in some communities as low propensity voters. They don't think you're going to vote in the first place. All they have to do is put a sign up in your community. And that's not okay. That's not okay. You have to actually go out there and leave. You can't leave any stone unturned.
In terms of being informed citizenry, do you feel that, or what is your stance on a possible responsibility of American citizens to read the United States Constitution?
Are you talking about in terms of mandatory?
No, not mandatory, but do you think that it's a good idea for people to read the United States Constitution?
Yes, I think it's very important, and because oftentimes I've talked to people before, and we have a conversation about the Constitution, and some people think the Constitution is just the amendments, and we got some work to do. We have some work to do, but again, like I said, this isn't a moment where we're attacking our people for not understanding it. We just want our people to understand it better, because if we understand it better, we hold individuals accountable, more transparency, because you have more public scrutiny. So people who have been in some of these positions for long, they can't do some of the things they've done. Anybody who lives in Cleveland right now, You have been able to see on your newspapers, on your local news information outlets, the type of corruption that is truly going on. And it's not just happening in Cleveland. This is happening all throughout the country.
That's right. You know, when we talk about being responsible and we want to be helpful, you know, we encourage people to vote. We encourage people to, if you don't know who's running, go to the Board of Elections to learn who's running and what's going on. Go to the Secretary of State's office to learn who's running and what's going on. Also, give it a shot. Look up the United States Constitution.
Yeah,
Read
100%.
through it. You know, look at the amendments. Look at all those different things. These are ways that you can become knowledgeable about the society that you live in and the role that you can play in it. It doesn't always have to be mystical, that you see certain people on TV or they're having public events and you're never really in the know. Go out there, do a little bit of research, and return with that much more information about what's going on. That way you can be an informed voter, you can be an informed conversationalist, and you can also be a leader in your community. And speaking of leadership, can you talk to me about your ideas on mobilizing adults to become more economically empowered and to become more situated to lead their families?
Well, so I think that's a number of ways we can do that, because or we can achieve that principle specifically. So addressing the fact that, like we talked about, lack of economic community development, whereas we can actually put more grants and more loans into these areas that have been heavily devastated due to redlining, marginalization efforts through the banks, the U.S. government sanctioned type of policies that have left those communities out. We have to invest in those communities. We have to invest into those people. We have to work as a system, make sure these people know how to access the information to improve on their homes. Because right now we have people homes that are actively degrading right now. They don't know how they can actually improve on it. Like in terms of what are the paint policies? Are there any grants for those things? How accessible is that to the constituent? We have to be out there the same way that we would do a census in any other normal year, as opposed to the pandemic of 2020, where we would send people to door to reach people. Those are the type of collaborative efforts that it's probably gonna take for us to truly see some dividends being yielded for people who are in the most devastated communities.
Sure. What is your actual platform? What is the platform that you're running on?
Oh, that's a great question. I appreciate you for asking. For anybody who doesn't know, one of the things, number one, I specifically said this and I'll say it again, I believe in reparations, and I support and I will advocate for a reparations bill. I have no problem saying that, and I will not shy away from it. Number two, one of the things that we need to be talking about, as I said again, is still investing into these areas that have been heavily marginalized. We need to make sure that these people have the chance. They need to have the same opportunity, because we cannot say America is the home of the brave and the land of the free if we are putting people in a position where they have a prison pipeline, where their youth is going to get to go to school and then go straight to a prison system. That's not sensible. We need to end privatized prison industries. So the companies, for anybody who's watching, look up what Core Civic is and GEO. These are privatized prison corporations. They lobby to the government for occupancy rates, which also means they're actively vying for influence into the government to ask them for these detention facilities that they have, so they can have more people inside of these facilities. And that is exactly what we're talking about as a violation of what the 13th Amendment is. The 13th Amendment prohibited slavery and the involuntary servitude, except for those who have been duly convicted. But we have seen now that that's an exploitation of the game. They're gaming the system, where not beforehand it was, you're arrested, you commit a crime. Now it's a business saying specifically, hey, we would like 75% of the people to be filled, and not the scale, but just saying in terms of how it sounds, how it looks. Well, we need X amount of people in here for us to cover this, and you see the numbers, they tend to increase when you see heavily being lobbied to the federal government, and that's not okay.
So it sounds like you're saying that the prison systems are being turned into a business where, from a business standpoint, you want a certain amount of your cells, jail cells, to be filled at all times, and
No,
so
not
you're
me.
not you,
Yeah.
but these organizations are
Mhm.
potentially lobbying to the public or the organizations or the government itself to figure out what they can do to get more people into their jail cells.
Yeah, and then they utilize some of these individuals for third party applications for some businesses and things of that nature. So if
Wow.
you've heard it, people making license plates, doing all kind of things, fires. I mean, all these things are real things that are actively going on. There's real
Mhm.
consequences not only to election but to the entire political process if we do not understand it. But it's definitely devastating if we don't understand it. But these things are still going on, and there are people who understand these processes.
Mhm.
You have bail reform. I talk about bail reform. I believe that we need to embark onto a new journey where it's not based upon the wealth that an individual has, but more so based on an assessment of whether or not that individual was more likely to commit another crime. And those are those things that are ongoing being discussed on a national level. Um, so that's something I agree with. We need to move away from the way the bail is being set up throughout this country.
Mhm.
Um, and another thing that I didn't touch base on enough is that because I am a young person who has grew up seeing the very beginning portion of the digital or the information age, that means that I'm more well equipped to actually see the issues that's going to become more of a problem over time. For instance,
Okay.
cybersecurity. I talk about cybersecurity a lot. We've seen from some of the largest hacks recently, the 2017 Equifax hack that affected 140 plus million individual Americans. We saw the SolarWinds hack that happened in 2020 that affected multiple federal agencies, and we're not even going to have the full report yet of exactly how many things were affected. And some of this stuff may be more sensitive, so it may not be for the general consumption. So these things are heavily impact your national security. Now,
Mhm.
the other side of it is that all of these sophisticated cyber attacks aren't necessarily targeted to your federal agency. We also have to deal with the majority of cyber crimes is actually for the financial aspects. Most of our small businesses that are affected by cyber attacks, they do not recover. They will
Right.
fail. Most of them will fail. So
Mhm.
imagine. So this is why it's important that from the federal level we need to improve and create more robust systems that creates the guidelines for our state, counties, and our municipal governments to administer. So we have more. We protect people's privately identifiable information. We protect our people, and most of all, we have to talk about data privacy too. I push very hard for data privacy, cybersecurity in America.
Mhm. Absolutely, absolutely huge. Cybersecurity in an increasingly technological world is
Hmm.
very important. People on their computers doing regular activity on their phones, doing regular activity, could be exposed to people who
Hmm.
want to hack, take your financial information. And like you said, we're moving into a different age when it comes to technology. And so that's absolutely huge. Now you mentioned reparations, which I
Okay.
I think it's very honorable of you to include that in your platform. What are your thoughts about the ADOS movement?
About the American descendants of slavery.
Mhm,
What do you mean exactly in relation to ADOS? What do you mean
mhm.
exactly?
So they're doing a lot of research on what reparations could look like for America, and I just wanted to know what your ideas are about what reparations could look like for America.
So one of the first things I want to say is this because I am not an economist. I won't speak too deeply in exactly of how this bill will look because that's something that's going to be a collaborative effort working with some
Mhm.
of these organizations. I have already and I've worked with some of the individuals who were a part of ADOS on a
Okay.
local level, other groups as well who are working to and dedicated to actually constructing what the actual reparations bills look like because where there's common controversies at is exactly who is going to receive said reparations. I mean, cash payments is definitely a huge portion of it, but then you have the other protections that must come with it. So this bill itself is not going to be something that is going to be a couple pages. This is going to be hundreds of pages. This bill is going to be hundreds of pages because it's going to affect so many things that you need to have. You need the verbiage of it must be. It's very dry, very, very dry, and not ambiguous, because ambiguous language within the bill can absolutely hamper and destroy the actual legislation in itself.
And so what you're talking about right there is the science of creating policy, that something like reparations is not just an effective conversation where someone hits a gavel and says, oh, give everybody $100,000. It is a very specific set of information that's going to line out exactly what's going to happen. There's no ambiguity. And what that means is that in order for reparations to be successful, people have to be in position in the community to take said reparation and invest it into their homes, into their communities and stuff like that. So it's a big opportunity for everybody to, like I said, have town hall forums, get more knowledge about what's going on out there. We're moving into an information age.
Yeah.
Gone are the days where you could just work your job and worry about your specific household. We're moving into an era where you need to know what's going on outside. You have to understand how our country is being impacted by world politics. You got to pay attention to people like Tariq Nasheed, who is still talking about reparations in 2021, community investment, cybersecurity, the private prison systems that our family members keep calling home complaining about. People are talking about these issues, and somebody has to stand up and address them. And today, inside of this hour on America's Next Motivator, that's you, Tariq K. Shabazz. Now, what I want to know from you, Tariq, as we round third base here is, what legacy do you intend to leave for your family and for yourself?
That is the toughest question, I think, that anybody can really actually, when you sit down and think about it.
Yeah.
About what legacy you want to leave behind. I just want to fight for the people. That's it. Other than that, because like I said, I've spent the time in the military where you don't necessarily get all your recognition for things that you do, and that's okay. And even with this thing, even what we're doing now, even with activism, I've been an activist too. When I've been home, since I've been home, I haven't just sat at the house. There's times where people don't even know I've been at certain events because I don't broadcast those things in a certain manner. Because what it's about was it was the work that I cared about, the impact. It wasn't about the recognition. So my legacy I'll leave behind, I just want to make sure that my kids, when I do have children with my wife, that our kids are happy and knowing that their dad actually worked as hard as he really could to actually realize people. That's what's going to matter to me the most, is anything. It's my children. I have my children.
Absolutely. When you say children and you're on the endeavor that you're on, which is, House of Representatives, I'm wondering to what extent you're going to support causes that are going to have a positive impact on children, young people, young adults who are in foster care. And I just want to remind you that foster care is a major system that feeds into the homelessness system. It feeds into the prison pipeline, and it feeds into failed life outcomes, unfortunately. And as someone who gets in a position to evaluate bills, evaluate policy, and also put things on the table, I just want to say, on behalf of myself, I spent years of my life in foster care, and for the other thousands of young people who are in that system right now, that we are looking to people like you, Tariq Shabazz from Cleveland, where foster care is an ever-present member of our community, to represent, to remember the youth in the foster care system, to remember the young adults, the 17-year-olds who've never had a mother and father to call their own, the 18-year-olds who've been homeless all 18 years of their life, who are going to be put out onto the streets at probably 20 or 21 years old, and they're not going to have anybody. We need people like you to remember them, because they become the people who are in the shelter, in the prisons, or they become America's Next Motivator, and we've had some of them stop by as well. But we want that number. We want that number to increase. We want that number to
100%.
increase. What are your thoughts about? What are your thoughts about the potential of the foster care system going forward?
In terms of the issues with the foster care, it's a very delicate situation, considering that some people who enter into the foster care may be under some very, very, different circumstances. Like they could have lost their parents, became orphan. It could, these are so many things that really could impact the lives of these individuals and young people. And as a congressman, one of the things I will address is that I will do my part in reaching out more with local orgs throughout the country, not just in my district, but throughout the country, so I can actually put forth the best policy possible. And if the bill is already out there, be the best advocate to ensure the passage of that bill. Because Absolutely. I don't have to draft every bill, but I can work to advocate to make sure we pass those bills that really improve the lives of those young people. We have to. We have to.
Absolutely. Tariq Shabazz, I want to let you know we're at the end of the show, guys. Everybody get your crown emojis ready. We're going straight to the crowns tonight. We want to let you know that we've listened to your story. We heard the way that you overcame adversity, how you rose above the violence, the trauma, the silence, and you spoke out. Today, you are running for Ohio Congress in a major way. We want to support you as you run for the House of Representatives, Ohio District 11. We're giving you your respect today while you're still alive to receive it, and we're giving you a crown today. Ladies and gentlemen, put your crown emojis into the chat. Put your crown emojis into the chat. We are letting you know, letting the world know that you, Tariq K. Shabazz, you are America's Next Motivator.
I need to work with you. I love the way you talk. I'm telling you that right now. You got me motivated right now. I feel I can conquer the world right now. You got me. I'm motivated.
You absolutely can. Thanks for stopping by today. All right.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Each and every episode of America's Next Motivator is going to have something here for you. We see your crowns, Janae. All you've got to do is stop by and pick it up.